Welcome to Hungarian Insights, your go-to channel for exploring Hungary's rich history, vibrant culture, and language learning resources. What happens when creativity meets censorship? In this episode, we uncover how Hungarian artists, writers, and musicians defied oppression with subtle acts of resistance during the Rákosi era and beyond.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this pivotal period in Hungarian history. We've talked about the political turmoil, the fight for freedom, and the crushing weight of Soviet control, but now I'm curious about something else. How did Hungarian artists, writers, and musicians respond to all of this? Did they, try to reflect these experiences in their work, or was that simply too dangerous?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of how art and culture can be both a reflection of and a reaction to political and social upheaval. In the case of Hungary, the Rákosi era and the aftermath of the 1956 revolution had this really profound impact on artistic expression.
So let's start with the Rákosi era. We talked about how controlling the regime was, they tried to dictate every aspect of life. Did that extend to the arts as well?
Absolutely.
Was there any room for creative freedom, or was everything strictly controlled?
Yeah, control was really the name of the game. Even in the arts, Rákosi, like Stalin, believed in the power of art to shape ideology and reinforce the communist message. So there was this heavy emphasis on what was called socialist realism.
Okay. Socialist realism. I've heard that term before, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you break it down for our listener?
Sure.
What kind of art fit into this category?
Well, imagine paintings of heroic workers, triumphant farmers' factories, churning out goods. It's all very idealized, very optimistic, designed to showcase these supposed triumphs of communism and inspire the masses. It was less about artistic expression and more about serving the state's propaganda machine.
That sounds incredibly stifling, for artists who might have wanted to explore different themes, different styles. What happened to those who didn't toe the line? Were there consequences for straying for the path of socialist realism?
Oh, absolutely. Artists who didn't conform faced censorship, blacklisting, even imprisonment. It was a very dangerous time to be a creative thinker, especially if your ideas didn't align with the party line.
So this wasn't just a matter of artistic preference, it was about survival.
Yeah.
You had to create art that pleased the regime, or you risked facing some pretty serious consequences. But were there artists who pushed back?
Sure.
Who tried to find ways to, express themselves within these constraints?
There were, and they had to be very clever about it. Some artists found ways to subtly critique the regime within this framework of socialist realism. They might use allegory, symbolism, or even just this slightly distorted perspective to convey a message that wasn't quite as rosy as the official narrative.
It's like they were speaking in code, using their art to communicate a message that couldn't be expressed directly. It must have been such a delicate balancing act, expressing dissent while avoiding the wrath of the censors. Were there any specific artists or works that stand out as examples of this kind of subtle resistance?
I think one striking example is the work of the painter Tibor Kiss. On the surface, his paintings seem to follow these conventions of socialist realism, but if you look closely, you see these subtle distortions, a sense of unease, a questioning of the official narrative. It's like he's saying, look, things aren't as perfect as they seem.
So it's not just about what's being depicted, it's about how it's being depicted.
Exactly.
The style, the tone, the underlying message. Those are the elements that allowed artists to subtly challenge the status quo. What about literature? Was there similar pressure on writers to conform to this socialist realism ideal?
Absolutely. Writers were expected to produce, novels, plays, poems that glorified the working class, celebrated the achievements of the Communist Party, and basically promoted this utopian vision of a socialist future.
But I imagine that amidst all of this ideological pressure, there were writers who yearned to explore other themes, other realities. Did they find ways to circumvent censorship?
Right.
Was there a kind of literary underground where these different voices could be heard?
Yeah, there were definitely writers who pushed the boundaries, and just like visual artists, they had to be creative. Some turned to historical fiction, using the past as this lens to critique the present. Others focused on personal stories, exploring the human condition in lights that transcended the narrow confines of socialist realism.
So using these different genres, these different approaches to tell stories that mattered to them, even if they couldn't be explicitly political.
Right.
Were there any particular writers or works that stand out in this regard?
One notable example, I think, is the novel The Sunken City by Magda Szabó. It's set in the aftermath of World War II and explores these themes of lost guilt and the struggle to make sense of a world that's been turned upside down. And while not overtly political, it subtly critiques the moral compromises and the psychological scars left by the war and the emerging communist regime.
It's like she's using this historical backdrop to reflect on the human condition in a way that resonates with the present, even if she can't directly address the political realities of the time.
Right.
What about music?
Yeah.
Was there a similar dynamic at play there? Did composers face the same pressure to conform to the regime's aesthetic preferences?
Absolutely. Composers were encouraged to write music that was accessible to the masses, patriotic in nature, and generally aligned with the ideas of socialism. Think folk-inspired melodies, heroic marches, uplifting choral works. Anything too experimental to avant-garde was probably frowned upon.
So no atonal symphonies or 12-tone compositions allowed.
Right.
But were there composers who tried to push the boundaries, who found ways to incorporate different influences, different styles into their work?
There were, and some of them got pretty creative about it. They might incorporate elements of jazz, modern classical music, even electronic music into their compositions, often disguising them within this framework of officially sanctioned genres.
That's amazing. It's like they were sneaking in these forbidden musical elements under the radar, finding ways to expand the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. Do you have any examples of composers who are particularly adept at this kind of musical subversion?
One notable figure is György Ligeti. His early work shows a clear influence of folk music, but he gradually introduced more experimental elements, manipulating rhythms, textures, and harmonies in ways that were both innovative and, in a subtle way, subversive.
It sounds like Hungarian artists, writers, and musicians, despite the constraints of the Rákosi era, found these ingenious ways to express themselves, to subtly critique the regime and to keep the flame of creative freedom alive. What about the impact of the 1956 revolution?
Yeah.
How did that event shape artistic expressions in the years that followed?
Well, the 1956 revolution was really a turning point. It shattered this illusion of a utopian socialist future and forced artists to confront the reality of Soviet oppression, the heartbreak of defeat, and this enduring spirit of resistance. There's a noticeable shift in tone, a willingness to engage with more difficult themes.
So a move away from subtle critique to a more direct engagement with the events of '56 and its aftermath.
Right.
Did the Kádár regime allow this kind of open expression, or were there still limits on what could be said, what could be created?
It wasn't complete freedom, of course. The Kádár regime, while less oppressive than Rákosi's, still kept a tight rein on things, but there was a noticeable relaxation of control. Artists and writers were given more latitude to explore sensitive themes, as long as they didn't directly challenge the legitimacy of the Communist Party. It was this period of cautious experimentation, a testing of the boundaries.
So a bit of a thaw in the cultural landscape. Were there any particular works that stand out as emblematic of this period?
Sure.
Works that capture the spirit of post-1956 Hungary?
One powerful example, I think, is the film Cold Days, directed by András Kovács. It tells the story of a group of Hungarian gendarmes who were forced to participate in the massacre of Serbian civilians during World War II. It's this stark and unflinching look at the dark side of Hungarian history, a film that dared to challenge the official narrative of wartime heroism.
Wow, a film that confronted the horrors of the past, implicating Hungary in the atrocities of World War II. That must have been incredibly controversial at the time. Did the regime try to suppress it?
It was definitely controversial, but it was also a critical and commercial success. It showed that there was this hunger for a more honest and nuanced engagement with history, even if it meant confronting some uncomfortable truths.
What about literature and music? Were there similar works that reflected this shift in artistic expression, this willingness to grapple with more complex themes?
Yeah, in literature, one standout work, I think, is the novel Fatelessness by Imre Kertész. It's based on his own experiences in Auschwitz and offers this really harrowing and deeply personal account of the Holocaust. It's a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable cruelty.
It sounds like a profoundly moving and important work, one that forces us to confront the darkest chapters of human history.
Right.
What about music? Were there composers who engaged with the themes of the 1956 revolution and its aftermath?
One notable example is Zoltán Jeney. His work often explores these themes of memory loss and the fragility of human existence. His compositions, often minimalist in style, create this sense of haunting beauty, reflecting the emotional landscape of post-1956 Hungary.
It's incredible how art, literature, and music can reflect the soul of a nation, capturing the essence of a particular historical moment. And in the case of Hungary, the art created during and after the Rákosi era and the 1956 revolution offers this powerful testament to the enduring spirit of the Hungarian people.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that even in the face of oppression, the human spirit finds ways to express itself, to resist, to create beauty and meaning. And that's a powerful message, not just for Hungary, but for anyone struggling with these challenges of freedom and self-expression.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground, the political turmoil, the fight for freedom, the impact on art and culture. It's been a fascinating journey. Any final thoughts for our listener before we sign off?
The story of Hungary during this period is a reminder that the human spirit is incredibly resilient. Even in the darkest of times, there's always this flicker of hope, a yearning for something better, and that yearning often finds expression in the most unexpected ways.
Beautifully put. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly remarkable chapter in Hungarian history.
Our podcast discussions are based on our ebook, Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. History, literature, art, music, science, sport. Scan the QR code or check the link in the description to download your copy of Hungary's Hall of Fame in a Nutshell. As a special bonus, you'll also receive the Illustrated Companion, featuring over 100 detailed illustrations to visually enrich your understanding of the book's content. Thank you for watching.